You're looking at a Burnham Design Bridge in Jackson Park, which happens to be in the Woodlawn neighborhood. And with the Obama Center opening up in this very park, I thought, you know what? Let's get a little education about what the history of Jackson Park is. I mean, look at this stunning spot here in Jackson Park. I brought an expert along. This is my friend Julia. Julia, how are you?
Hi, I'm good, thank you.
So Julia, you have a big fancy title. You used to work with the Park District for over 20 years. Give me your title, and you are a historian as well.
I'm retired from the Chicago Park District.
Right.
I was the Park District's historian and preservationist, and now I'm a consulting historian in Chicago.
Why is this such a treasure for Chicago? And that bridge, there's a fun story with that bridge that you got to get into.
Okay, absolutely. Well, first of all, Jackson Park is really one of the most significant places in Chicago. It's a beautiful landscape designed by a very famous landscape architect, Frederick Law Olmsted. And so it's almost like the Central Park of Chicago. That's the same.
Right, because he did that. Right?
Absolutely. And he gave us, in our region, he also designed the town of Riverside, which is extraordinary. In Chicago, Frederick Law Olmsted designed one large park that we now think of as three sort of separate landscapes: Jackson Park, Washington Park, and the Midway Plaisance. So then the next thing that happens is Chicago gets selected as the site of the World's Columbian Exposition. Everybody wanted it in their neighborhood.
Of course.
And there were some major civic leaders on the South Side who really felt that Jackson Park was the best place for the fair. So Frederick Law Olmsted got hired then to come back to Chicago and do a second plan, and this time it was actually for the fair, which was a temporary experience. Many people know it lasted 6 months, and it had lots of beautiful classically designed buildings like this one, but all made out of staff, which was basically a type of plaster. Essentially what happens is that Burnham and Olmsted, and they each had a partner, the four designers worked very closely together, coming up with this scheme. It also influenced a whole new movement of American design called the City Beautiful movement. So it kind of harkens back to ancient Greece and Rome, and that you'd have these very beautiful classical buildings, and that would create kind of outdoor courtyards and spaces, the way they kind of related to one another. And they were quite monumental. And yes, they were made out, most of them were made out of this type of temporary white plaster. They were whitewashed, so that's why it was called the White City. Why do we end up with just the one building? Well, by the time, really very early on, from when they opened the fair, which was in the late spring of 1893, Burnham and some others were already bemoaning the idea that the whole thing would be raised within a couple of years. They realized that the magnitude of this, it really put Chicago on the map for the world. And as I said, it influenced design and architecture and landscape architecture, but also it influenced lots of other things because of all the really cool products and foods and all the other, innovations that people could see in the exhibits of the fair. So it was a really important experience for Chicago. And so they really quickly began thinking, we want something permanent. Well, out of all the buildings that they might have saved, why did they pick this one? Because it was the Fine Arts Palace, and they had to build a fire vaulted interior. So it had a more permanent interior structure than the other buildings. The other ones were a little bit more like a movie set, because they knew they didn't really have to be heated or, but this one, they had to worry about, controlling the temperature, having good fireproofing, because some really famous people like Bertha Palmer, well-to-do people that had important art collections, as well as museums from all over the world, were lending, their artworks to be shown here.
And also Bertha Palmer, didn't she also have somebody come up with the brownie for said World's Fair?
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Yes, and she was on the Ladies Board of Commissioners, and there was also a women's exhibit. She was involved with that, and so I think a lot of the leading Chicagoans all kind of left their own sort of stamp of contributing to the history.
And now it's the anchor of one of the anchors of Jackson Park, but there's so much other history in this park. There's a golf course, there's a harbor, there's even a beach, that goes on the shores of Lake Michigan. You gave me a list and I ran through a bunch of them. Run down the list of some of the highlights that is Jackson Park.
I think this park has some of the most beautiful landscapes that I've ever seen. I think most people in Chicago know that it has a Japanese garden. And it's had this Japanese garden for many, many years. There was a really interesting Japanese pavilion during the time of the fair. There was just a little garden associated with it, but there were a lot of garden installations on the wooded island at that time. And then after the fair, it was really at the time of Chicago's second World's Fair in 1933 and 34 that people were trying to think of what to do with all this beautiful landscape material that was left over from that fair. And there was a beautiful Japanese garden out on the northerly island. They said, well, we don't want to throw away all of these great, cherry trees. And so they just moved it all and made it was an in-house Chicago Park District project. Moved the garden, I shouldn't say they moved it. They redesigned and made a whole new garden, but they were able to repurpose by transplanting a lot of the plant material that had been there. And it's beautiful. It's a really interesting space, the wooded island. Olmsted, he was very concerned about the idea of having this Japanese pavilion because he didn't want any buildings on the island. He wanted it to be it
was supposed to be a place of solitude, right?
Exactly. He thought that people spending a day with these thousands of exhibits, these humongous, giant, beautiful buildings, all housed, so many different things.
All along the outside of the wooded island, right? Like they kind of.
Well, there was a court of honor, and so that was you had the wooded island, and it at the south end of the wooded island, the lagoon, and the wooded island in his original plan had been a peninsula. So he carved that into made it, instead of a peninsula, it was very similar because it had these great oak trees that he wanted to preserve, made it into a peninsula, and then at the south end, which we don't really have anymore, it would flow into this sort of beautiful, very formal waterway that was called the Court of Honor. The Statue of the Republic, which we affectionately called the Golden Lady, who's kind of like Chicago's answer to, the Statue of Liberty, had her back to Lake Michigan, and then she was facing that Court of Honor.
So just steps away from Jackson Park Golf Course, you have this beautiful commemorative statue that is the Statue of the Republic. And the Statue of the Republic, a huge part of what made the World's Fair of 1893 so grand and gilded. It was absolutely stunning. The original one, much, much, much bigger than this. But the Statue of the Republic is a gilded bronze sculpture by Daniel Chester, based by Henry Bacon, originally dedicated in 1918 to commemorate the 25th anniversary of the 1893 World's Fair. It was restored in 1992 by the Chicago Park District, rededicated by Mayor Richard Daley to initiate a celebration of the 100th anniversary of the Chicago World's Fair of 1893. So a pretty cool spot here, just at the doorstep of the Jackson Park Golf Course. You also have other little pieces of history throughout the park, like the Burnham designed bathroom that's just been restored, and then also another Burnham-like rest area that's kind of by the golf course.
He married John Sherman's daughter. John Sherman was the founder of the Stockyards. And so, he was just this struggling young architect who he started a partnership with John Wellborn Root. And here's these two young guys. This was a time, it was probably sometime in the 1870s. So after the fire, a lot of young architects knew there would be opportunities to rebuild the city. So Chicago was a great place to try to establish yourself. And they had both worked in the same firm, and they decided, let's try to, start our own firm. And they had no money. They barely could afford the pencils that they needed to do their drawings. But somebody recommended them to John Sherman and said, these two young guys are really talented. So they get this commission to do a fancy mansion. I think it was going to be on Prairie Avenue in Chicago. It doesn't exist anymore. But so every time when it was time for Burnham to kind of show the sketches to the family, when he'd ring on the doorbell, the 18 or 19-year-old daughter, Margaret, would answer the door. They fell in love. And so do you think that one of the richest guys in Chicago was going to let his daughter be married to a struggling architect?
No, I don't think
Not
so.
exactly. And so he was on, they lived on the South Side. He was on the board of commissioners for the South Park Commission. And so, that's, it's a little different than how things are done, but connections have always been important. And, he said that he'd like to have the South Park Commission have these young architects do some work. So the really modest early projects that they did, like their earliest projects, were this bridge, which later becomes known as the Clarence Darrow Bridge. But it's from, they designed it in 1880, so this is really early.
Really early, yeah.
And then there's a little bathroom that was a ladies' comfort station, because they didn't bother making one for men back then. Also with the beautiful limestone, and it was recently restored. And that also is from maybe 1881 or 83 or, that early period. It's got just the most incredible views. Some of these waterways are stocked with fish, so you see, fishermen. And
the Daniel Burnham building, though, all the way down by the golf course.
So that was a little bit kind of later in the story, and by that point, Olmsted. Remember, we've got sort of the Olmsted from the East Coast, and then we've got Burnham and Root from Chicago. Olmsted's sons had now kind of taken over the family business, and they do the plan for the University of Chicago, but they also are asked, and this is in about 1903 to 05, to come up with a whole new plan for a whole new type of park, because as tens of thousands of immigrants were, settling into the south side of the city, and neighborhoods were becoming quite dense. They wanted to make sure that the parks could fulfill the needs of the neighbors, the people who lived around them. And so they realized that these parks that were, largely bridges and water and trees and lawn, that there could be more to, provide services to the community. And so the Olmsted brothers get hired at that point to design a whole system of new parks for the South Side. And at this point, recreation's becoming a little, more of a kind of big thing. So at that point, they start designing field houses where there's some like indoor gyms and things like that. Roughly around that same time, I think the earliest part of the golf course was from 1899. So it does sort of represent this arc of active recreation that's becoming a bigger and bigger thing. And so the golf course, I think, went at one point from a 9-hole to 18-hole. And so they realized if people are going to be playing a game and cover that much space, that we need some restrooms and we need some shade and just a little shelter. And so the design of it is very similar to a lot of the field houses that Burnham was building in the Olmsted Brothers designed park. So there was a lot of collaboration between these firms. It's this moment, that's 1895, leading up to the turn of the century. That's when people start wanting a few more kinds of recreational opportunities. So that's when their plan doesn't include the golf course, but it included a great play field. And so part of what they put in as a play field becomes the golf course. And even today, we still have ball fields over there as well, and running track. And there were actually separate ones in their plan for men and women. So we call that an outdoor gymnasium. And so this is one of the first times that the Olmsted firm had included this element, and then they end up, they're a national firm. They're working on parks and cities all over the country. Plus they come back to Chicago and do it. So that area of the park, and there's still kind of a running track in front of the high school.
Yeah, there is.
Park High School. And so, there were two of them.
I see.
And then the Midway Plaisance came all the way to the water because Olmsted's idea was that water would flow down the Midway.
And you can see those beautiful stone bridges off in the distance when you're in the garden looking east.
Oh yeah, that's the Music Court Bridge.
Yeah.
Some of this all dates back to after the fair, right after the fair.
But all part of Jackson Park's history.
Oh yeah. And I mean, some of the most beautiful aspects of the fair were the design right after the fair. Like that's a lot of really what we have in the
Yeah,
park
and now
today.
you have cherry blossoms that overlook this lagoon that people come out here in the spring, the Obama Center opening up, and it goes all the way down to 67th Street, I believe, as far as the footprint of Jackson Park, and then all the way to the lakefront, and as far east as, far west as
The Midway.
the Midway. Yeah, thank you.
It's just different now because
Yeah, it is, but
it looks a little different on that edge, but it's still really worth kind of walking along the Midway. And then, I mean, the University of Chicago is beautiful too. So this whole, there's a lot to discover.
And it used to be called, or it was supposed to originally be called the South Park?
It was actually called
was
South
that?
Park. It was called South Park. And if you look at the original plan, it was the Eastern Division, the Western Division,
Midway.
and the Midway Plaisance.
Sure. The World's Fair of 1893, one of the most historic events ever to take place in Chicago. There's just not much left of it except for what is in Jackson Park. Of course, you have the Museum of Science and Industry, and then you have the wooded island. Look at this space here. This used to be nothing but marshland. This water was not here. Frederick Olmsted, who designed Central Park in New York City, was tasked to design this. He had $16 million to make something out of nothing, and he did. Along the edge there, the bank of the lagoon, you would have over 200 buildings that would make up the World's Fair. And inside here was the respite. And you also have the Osaka Garden that lies within the wooded island. Today, there are over 250 types of birds. Bird watchers come from near and far to enjoy this space. And if you're a big person who wants to identify trees, they have this handy map that you can see right along the walking route here, the Wooded Island Tree Identification. And they also have this other fancy map here that explains a little bit of what goes on at the World's Fair back in the day. But behind me, though, that is this true star of the show for 2026 and beyond, adding to the legacy that is Jackson Park. You have the Obama Presidential Center located right here on the western edge of the park itself. It is 19.3 acres of campus, and it includes a world-class museum, Chicago Public Library, Community Athletic Center with a, of course, NBA-sized basketball court, recording studio, sledding hill, outdoor community gardens. $30 will get you in. There's discounts for military, all right here in this historic space that is Jackson Park. And when I mean truly historic, I really do. This lagoon here was designed to have boats go all the way through to Lake Michigan. Out that way, you can see one of the beautiful bridges that are still here from the time that it was created. And up this way here, you see Museum and Science and Industry through those woods. Truly a lot of history right here in Woodlawn.